One island, three proud nations, and for 1,000 years they did everything they could to destroy each other. Yet somehow England, Scotland, and Wales ended up as a single country. Great Britain, it wasn't a wedding, it wasn't even, in the end, a war. Great Britain was born out of one of the most catastrophic money disasters in history. This is how it actually happened. Our story starts with an empire walking away. For nearly 400 years, this island was the wild northwestern edge of the Roman world. Then, around the year 410, Rome pulled out its legions for good and left Britain to fend for itself. What followed was chaos. The island splintered into a patchwork of small, hungry kingdoms. Settlers, the Angles, the Saxons, and the Jutes, sailed in from across the North Sea, carving out their own territories and fighting endlessly for more. By the 800s, there was no England and no Scotland as we know them. Just dozens of rival crowns, every one of them convinced it should rule the rest. Whole dynasties rose and were wiped out inside a single generation. The strong swallowed the weak, and the map of the island seemed to redraw itself every time a king died. And then came the Vikings. In the year 865, an enormous Norse army landed in England, not to raid and leave the way they had before, but to stay, to conquer. Kingdom after kingdom fell before them. Within just a few years, the Vikings controlled most of the country. Only one English kingdom refused to break, Wessex, and its young king would become a legend, Alfred the Great. In 878, beaten, hunted, and hiding in the marshes, Alfred did the impossible. He raised a new army and crushed the Vikings at the Battle of Edington. He couldn't drive them out completely, but he stopped them cold. And he planted an idea that would outlast him by centuries, that all the English should be one people under one crown. That dream came true under Alfred's grandson, Athelstan. In the year 927, Athelstan seized the last Viking stronghold at York and forced the kings of the north to bow to him. For the very first time, one ruler held all of England. Historians often call him the first king of the English. And when his enemies banded together to take it all back, he destroyed them at the Battle of Brunanburh in 937. England was now a single unified kingdom. One nation down, two to go. Just to the west lay Wales, a land of mountains, of proud Welsh princes, and of castles. For centuries the Welsh held off their far bigger English neighbour. But in the 1270s, one man decided that Wales would be his. King Edward I of England. Edward invaded with overwhelming force. In 1282, the last native Prince of Wales, Llywelyn, was killed. And to make sure Wales could never rise again, Edward ringed its coast with a chain of gigantic stone fortresses, some of the most intimidating castles ever built in Europe. Wales was conquered. Centuries later, under Henry VIII, it was formally written into the English kingdom by law. Two of our three nations were now bound together. But there was one kingdom that simply would not bow: Scotland. Drunk on victory, Edward I turned north, certain he could add Scotland to his collection too. They called him the Hammer of the Scots. What he got instead was a war that ground on for decades, savage even by the standards of the age. First, a rebel named William Wallace, who routed an English army at Stirling Bridge before he was finally captured and brutally executed. Then the man who would become Scotland's greatest hero, Robert the Bruce. In 1314, outnumbered and outgunned, Bruce met a huge English army at a boggy field called Bannockburn, and he shattered it. Scotland had kept its freedom. A few years later, its nobles signed the Declaration of Arbroath, with its famous line that they fought not for glory or riches, but for freedom alone. Scotland would stay a proud, independent kingdom for another 400 years. So look at the map now. England and Wales joined. Scotland defiantly separate. These were not friends. So how on earth did they ever become one country? The answer begins not with a battle, but with a death. In 1603, Queen Elizabeth I of England died with no children and no heir. By blood, the English crown had to pass to her nearest relative. And that relative was, astonishingly, the King of Scotland himself, James VI. Overnight, James became king of both nations at once, one man, two crowns. But here is the twist. This did not make them one country. England and Scotland still kept their own parliaments, their own laws, even their own armies. They simply shared a king, and for the next 100 years, that is all Great Britain was. A king in common and almost nothing else. What finally fused them together wasn't love, it wasn't conquest, it was money, or rather, the catastrophic loss of it. By the 1690s, England was building a global empire and growing rich on trade. Scotland, watching from the sidelines, wanted in. So it gambled everything on one audacious plan dreamed up by a Scotsman named William Paterson. The idea was a Scottish colony at Darien, on the narrow strip of land we now call Panama, a trading post between two oceans that would make Scotland wealthy beyond imagination. And Paterson was no dreamer with no credentials. He had helped found the Bank of England itself. The whole nation bought in. Nobles, merchants, ordinary families, all pouring their life savings into the Company of Scotland. By some estimates, the scheme swallowed up around a fifth of all the money in the entire country. It was a catastrophe. Darien turned out to be a disease-ridden swamp. The settlers arrived in the rainy season and began to die almost at once, from fever, from hunger, from sheer exhaustion. And when they begged the nearby English colonies for food and shelter, none came. The English king, desperate not to provoke Spain, had ordered his colonies to give the Scots nothing at all. Of the roughly 2,500 people who set sail for Darien, only a few hundred ever made it home. Within 2 years, the colony was abandoned, and with it, a fifth of Scotland's wealth simply vanished into the jungle. Scotland's ruling class was financially gutted and bitterly aware that English orders had helped doom the colony. The kingdom was on its knees, and England saw its opening. England offered a deal: dissolve both parliaments, become one kingdom, and in return England would pay. A large sum of money would flow north, much of it landing in the pockets of the very investors that Darien had ruined. That payment even had a name: the equivalent. Just under £400,000, a fortune at the time. For Scotland's battered elite, it was a lifeline too tempting to refuse. There were riots in the streets against it. The poet Robert Burns would later snarl that Scotland had been bought and sold for English gold. But in 1707, both parliaments passed the Acts of Union, and on the 1st of May, the Kingdom of England and the Kingdom of Scotland both ceased to exist. In their place stood one brand new country, the Kingdom of Great Britain. It was the end of two of the oldest kingdoms in Europe, and the birth of a single nation that would soon go on to build the largest empire the world had ever seen. And so the strangest part of all: the United Kingdom was not really forged in battle. It was forged in bankruptcy. 1,000 years of war between England, Wales, and Scotland ended not by a sword, but by a failed colony and a financial bailout. You can still read the whole story in the flag: the Cross of England and the Cross of Scotland, layered into one. The Union Jack is, quite literally, these old enemies stitched together. But the country you know today was still missing a piece: Ireland, and the story of how Ireland was forced in and then fought its way back out might just be the wildest chapter of them all. That one is coming next. If you enjoyed untangling this, subscribe. I break down how a different country came to be every single week. And tell me down in the comments which country I should map next. I read every single suggestion, and yours might be the next video.